Welcome to the Worldwide Doula podcast. I'm Barry, I'm a registered nurse and birth doula, and each week I'm joined by a new guest speaker to talk about all things pregnancy, birth, babies, and parenthood. So it's time to sit back and relax as we get into some juicy topics. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Worldwide Doula podcast. Today I'm welcoming a fellow doula, Elizabeth, back to the podcast. She was actually one of the first guest speakers I had on the podcast. So welcome. I'm super excited for our episode today. Thank you for coming back on to talk to me.
Thank you for having me.
Elizabeth is a birth doula and childbirth educator in Hillsdale, Michigan, where she provides birth and postpartum education and support to mothers and their families. Do you want to quickly tell us what you've been doing since the last time we've had you on the podcast?
Yes. So last time I was here, I had just gotten started and I hadn't actually had a birth yet. Since then, I've been able to support two moms. One was a fourth-time mom and one was a first-time mom, and they're both local. And I also got involved with midwife assisting with the Amish midwife in my area, and I've been able to be at a total of 6 births in the past 2 months.
Wow, that's amazing. Have you enjoyed these experiences so far?
Yes, they've actually really opened up my eyes to the diversity of birth, especially the differences between first-time moms and I think they're called multifs, but it's really opened up my eyes to the differences in people's birth journeys and especially the differences between birth cultures. The Amish culture is very different than our Western culture, even though we live in the same area. The philosophy of birth is vastly different. They see birth as a very natural process and almost unavoidable for those who are married or wanting to pursue marriage. And in our Western world, with all the contraception and just our philosophy, it seems a little bit more in our control. And yet that almost hinders the birth process because we struggle to surrender more than they do. So it's been very interesting to just see the differences.
Wow, that actually sounds so amazing. I don't know any Amish communities. I don't think I've ever lived near an Amish community before. Are their way of living very, very different from normal? I don't even know what normal is anymore.
I don't think they are very common outside of the US. I don't know. They might have some in Canada. So the Amish are basically a religious people group that kind of commits themselves to a very simple way of living. It's very similar to people that you would see dressed in the olden days, Western culture. They live on farms without electricity, or some of them don't have running water. And then depending on who the leader is, or they call him the bishop, whoever the bishop is, he kind of decides what rules they have to follow.
Sounds like a completely different world. Wow. So in this episode, Elizabeth has come on to help me answer some questions that were sent in by listeners about doulas, what they do, how they support you and your partner in pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. And there's quite a few, so let's get to it. So the first question is super simple. What is a doula? Oh gosh, my term is a non-medical support person. They are the person who basically fills the gap that midwives aren't able to. Midwives provide the medical side of things, and then doulas provide the emotional and a little bit of educational side of things, basically. They're there most of the time when the midwife can't be there, because the midwife is only able to be there a certain percentage of the time, and the midwife is there pretty much the whole time throughout the pregnancy and then in the birth and then after postpartum. They do provide that continuity of care. So for me, that's what a doula is. Do you have a different definition that you could give us?
I don't have a different definition, but I really resonate with the continuity of care. And also, they're very relational in how they approach what they provide their clients. So, as you were talking, a midwife might have multiple clients that she has to get to or has to deliver for. A doula really restricts the amount of clients they have so they can build that relationship with them and they can support them throughout the whole process from pregnancy, the whole birth, and then postpartum. So, a doula also kind of becomes part of your village during this journey, whereas other birth professionals don't have the luxury of being able to provide as much time as a doula does.
This kind of goes into the next question. How are they different from a midwife, which we kind of already touched on? Midwives kind of have to adhere to a code of conduct in a way. There is kind of a code of conduct for doulas. I know that you have like something that you prescribe to, nursing and midwifery union or whatever, like that version for a doula. But we don't really have a code of conduct. I mean, we have a scope of practice, but as long as we stay inside the scope of practice, we don't work for the hospital at the end of the day. Like during COVID, for instance, as a nurse, I was told that I had to tell people to get the COVID vaccine because otherwise I'd lose my job. That's like, what? But as a doula, you don't really have to adhere to any of those rules, basically. Just wanted to put that out there.
I know that for me, I have chosen to become a part of a birth collective. So I do have a code of ethics. That's
Mm,
probably what you were referring to,
yeah.
but not all doulas do that. And so it's really similar to other fields that are more holistic or even artistic, where, a painter doesn't necessarily have rules to follow, but maybe if they're commissioned, then they have certain things they're trying to achieve. But when it comes to doula care, it's so diverse. And that kind of leads into the next question that talks about training and certification. Not all doulas have to be certified. There's no regulated, like you were saying, like this list that we have to check off. It's really just a support person for birth
Mm.
and for pregnancy and the other things around it. There are trainings available, and I would not recommend a doula that didn't have training because it's so important to understand what a doula can do. There'd be challenges to not having training, but certification, there's so many different places you can certify through, and they all require different things. So it's very diverse, and not all doulas have the same level of education or training.
It's true. When I started to study to be a doula, I actually applied to be a midwife and then I didn't get into the place that I wanted to. I had a particular place and it was very competitive, but I didn't end up getting in. So I was like, okay, this is what I was meant to do. I was supposed to become a doula. And when I started studying, they said that you don't have to be qualified. You don't have to have a certification to be a doula. Anyone can say that they're a doula. And that's a bit scary, If you're hiring someone and you're paying someone good money to support you in your birth, you want to know that they have the knowledge behind them to tell you, to educate you properly. At least have some sort of medical training, first aid, CPR, that's the basics. You'd hope that they would have that at least. But yes, in saying that, if a doula is certified and they maybe haven't had any births and they don't have any children, they're just starting out, versus someone who isn't certified, who has been birthing children for what, 20, 30, 40 years, it's up to you to decide which one you want at the end of the day. Every doula is different. They provide different levels of care and even certifications, even different certifications are so different.
Right. And I think that's part of the job of the client, the person that's trying to find the doula, is deciding what you want out of a doula. Because if you're wanting someone who has, a lot of kids, who has very positive birth experiences, who can kind of just hold your hand and walk with you, versus you're wanting a lot of education or you're
Yeah.
wanting someone with connections, each are very different. Like I don't have any kids of my own. I've never given birth, but my doula care is very education heavy, and I have a lot of business partnerships. So my clients that come to me, they get a free adjustment from this one massage therapist. Their kids get an adjustment from a cranial sacral therapist because I have this network I built around me for my clients, because I'm more focused on care during pregnancy and postpartum. But if you're wanting someone who has multiple kids and who's kind of more of a motherly figure, that's not going to be me.
Yeah, as I said, different doulas, different needs, right? I actually had a client come to me and say to me, I want you particularly because you're also a nurse as well as a doula. And I was like, oh, thanks. And actually, surprisingly, in the US, there are a lot of midwives that are also doulas so that they can have the holistic side of a holistic midwifery almost. But where I'm living in Indonesia, I've asked around because I couldn't take her on as a client. I asked around and all the doulas said, that's not a thing. Doulas don't have medical training. Like midwives aren't also doulas. And I'm like, well, Maybe it's just in Bali because there are a lot in America. So that might be another thing. They might have other certifications. They might also be osteopaths or they might also be doctors. I don't know.
I know in my area, there's a lot of nurses that do have doula training. However, there are some challenges with that because
Yeah.
if a nurse has doula training, they're able to provide some of the positionings and some of the holistic comfort measures that a doula might provide, but they aren't able to do the continuity of care, nor are they able to properly advocate because they're advocating against their boss.
Yes. There needs to be a line.
Yeah, if you're wanting someone to advocate for your birth plan, it's likely not going to be someone who's a nurse that works in that hospital. It just gets really blurry. It just depends on what you want. But I really do like seeing more nurses with holistic training because then when I come in, they already know what I'm there to do. We can work together.
If you do end up hiring a doula who's also a nurse in that hospital, it's about saying that, okay, I'm no longer a nurse. I'm here in my doula job. Like I'm a doula, I'm not a nurse. What happens here is me as a doula. I'm not held by the constraints of my nursing contract. Anyway, enough about that. How does a doula support a woman during pregnancy?
Well, at least in my experience, what I do, primarily through getting her resources and the education she needs to be prepared for birth, especially for first time moms who don't know what to expect. Having someone who's seen multiple births and the things that can affect it is really beneficial because they're able to sit down with the person, talk through what to expect, and then create a plan based off of what their desires are, and then also recognize if the plan changes, how we can adapt it. So with my clients, the first thing that they get is a client packet, which gives them a bunch of local resources. It gives them classes, maybe coupons to my business partnerships I'd previously mentioned. And we go over what they want out of their birth, what they want it to feel like, what are some things that they know they want, and what are topics I can get them more information on. So it's really just a doula provides a central location for resources and information that can save a mom a lot of time because otherwise you're Google searching all of these things. And if you don't know what to look for, then you're not going to have it. And a doula with a lot of experience can come in and say, well, what do you think about this? And just make the process a lot more streamlined.
Yeah, definitely. And also, if you are classified as high risk and, you're having some difficulties during your pregnancy, if you're having hyperemesis where you're vomiting a lot from morning sickness and it goes into the second trimester and sometimes into the third trimester, if you're on bed rest, a doula can come in and they can be there as a support person in that time before you have your baby and come and cook and clean and do all the things that you can't do because you can't get out of bed. And that's also on top of educating and providing guidance on how the partner or the birthing team, the people who are going to be supporting the mum in the birthing room, wherever that may be, teaching them and educating them how to support her so that then they can just jump in and be hands-on. And you are just there as a support person on the outside, helping guide them so that they can have that experience together rather than you and the mum having the experience and the dad or the support person being like, okay, I'm just here in the corner.
A lot of my work when I work with couples is that just kind of teaching them how they can come together during this time because it's so
Mm.
new. And if you go into a birth without having talked about what you want, then the partner ends up asking, well, what can I do? What can I do? And that can be a little overwhelming in the birth space just because there's so many other things going on. So it allows a teaching opportunity before then so they can start practicing and implementing those comfort measures early.
And you get to try out all the fun tools.
Yeah.
Your doula will normally bring tools and you can try them out before the birth so that you can decide what you want to do. And yeah, having a doula before your birth is really just going to bring it all together when it actually does happen. And engaging a doula is like last minute. it's a good idea still, but it's good if you can get them earlier.
You can get all of those resources earlier. So, with my one client that just gave birth, because she hired me so early, I was able to find her a free maternity shoot. I was able to send her links to discounted baby items. And they did a couples photo shoot that I found through a friend who was doing discounts. And so she was able to have the birth experience she wanted because I was able to be vigilant and send her all of these opportunities as they came throughout her pregnancy. It just looks so different for each person. And depending on whether or not you're planning a home birth or a hospital birth, there are different things that you have to prepare for. And having a doula for a home birth, she can help prepare you for how you can use your own space to aid in labor progression. And if you're planning a hospital birth, they can teach you what to expect or like hospital vernacular that might be used. And that just helps you mentally prepare for the birth and not feel overwhelmed or bombarded with all of these new things as you're trying to deliver a baby.
Exactly. Addressing it before the baby comes,
Right.
before the labor starts. Yeah. I just wanted to quickly touch on something that we didn't touch on before, and that's the different types of doulas. There is a pregnancy doula. They're not as common, and they do normally support moms who are high risk, as I mentioned before, bed rest, all that stuff. And then there's the birth doula. Obviously, they come in, they help you support you during the labor and the birth, all that jazz. How long do you normally stay after the birth with the parents?
It depends on whether or not they've had a C-section or if there's things that they're waiting on. But typically, after all of the commotion, whether they need stitches or they're waking up from anesthesia or whatever it is, I stay 2 hours and don't leave until the baby's latched.
Perfect. So they will stay 2 hours or however long. It might be longer that you want them to stay, or it might be less. It's up to you. And then there's the postpartum doula that helps with breastfeeding after the birth. They help come and clean. They can cook. They can help with sorting out the support system. So organizing the support system, almost like a schedule of people who will come and help you do your laundry. There are also nighttime doulas that can help you get some sleep and take care of the baby. It doesn't mean that you can't breastfeed during the night. They will help you by bringing the baby to you. You can breastfeed without having to get up. And then they'll just take the baby after the breastfeed and change the nappies and just let you sleep so that you get that much needed sleep. And then there are also sibling doulas that if you do want your child at the birth, your other children, they can come in and they can be a support person for the child. If the child needs to leave the room for a little bit, they'll go with the child, just there for the child, pretty much. They just do everything for the child, make them something to eat if they need something to eat, reassure them if they need something. Then there are a whole range of other doulas that we will touch on a bit later, like miscarriage and stuff like that. But those are pretty much the basic ones around birth. And then there are other ones that like come into other major life transitions, like a death doula or, a transition doula when you're transitioning from being a male to a female or, gender change.
Yeah, any big life event.
Yeah, exactly.
How early in your pregnancy should you start looking for a doula?
I normally get clients coming to me at like 16 weeks. Some even come to me at like 4 weeks. And then others are like, oh, I'm 36 weeks and I need a doula. Can you be my doula? So at all times during pregnancy, they come to me. But look, if you are feeling like you have no idea what you're doing, if you need some help, if you need some reassurance, if you need some guidance, it's never too early to engage the doula. Normally, doulas will start accepting clients in 26 weeks earliest. Some will start actually working with them at like the 36-week mark because then that's a few weeks before the baby comes. But each doula has a different schedule package.
And I think it also depends how picky you are. If you want a specific person, the earlier you go to, the more likely it is you'll be able to get them. But if you're pretty go with the flow, you just want someone to be there and help out, then maybe it's not as imperative that you get them early.
Yeah, that's really what it comes down to. Some doulas will offer 24/7 access to text message or something, and other doulas will just do like a 1 hour meet per week or something like that. So each doula has their different packages that they offer. How does someone communicate your birth preferences or their birth preferences to a doula?
Well, I think it's as important as just saying what they want or saying what you want to know more of. A doula doesn't create a birth plan on your behalf. They really open up the discussion to see what your values are and how to implement that in the birth space. So, as far as how do you communicate your birth preferences, just letting them know. If you have a doula, they should be someone that you can trust and that you believe supports you unconditionally and that you are able to confide in. And so it's really as simple as just letting them know what your birth preferences are. And if you don't know what they are, then they can help foster that discussion to figure out what you want your birth space to feel like and maybe offer some ideas of what they think could be suited for you.
Yeah, I think it is amazing at how many options you have. And what you can put in your birth plan is endless. There are so many options that a lot of people don't know about, like a lotus birth. A lot of people don't know what a lotus birth is. A lotus birth is basically where you leave the baby attached to the placenta and then you will birth the placenta, and that's a lotus birth, basically. So just knowing, like, even alternative pain methods, educating mums about different forms of pain methods because people like, I want to do it non-medically, no medication at all. And that's great. That's great. If you really want to do that, we can totally support you to do that. But it doesn't mean you don't have any forms of pain relief. There are lots of non-medical pain relief. Forms of pain relief. There is the comb, just being in the water. If you want to have music, if you want to have massage, they can help you organize that. So a doula is really there to help you understand all of your options so that you can be like, okay, that sounds like something that I want to try. And they're also there to make it realistic. You can put everything in the birth plan, but then at the end of the day, it kind of has to be realistic. There are some things that unfortunately cannot be done in some cases. So yeah, they do help. If you come into hospital and you have some unrealistic request, the doctor's probably just going to laugh at you and disregard your whole birth plan. So
Yeah, and I think that would be the discussion. If that's how your provider treats you, then, and that's not how you want your birth to
yeah.
feel like, then that's a sign to get another provider. But that being said, I think part of in creating the birth plan, you create plan B and plan C because sometimes unexpected things arise. And yes, it might not be realistic to have something happen, but that doesn't mean that you can't put it in there and communicate that if it is still your preference. But I
Mm.
think one of the things I've realized as a birth doula is the institution or the place that you pick to give birth will play the largest role in your birth outcome. If you have a hospital birth, you're going to have to advocate more if you still want it unmedicated. If you want an uninterrupted golden hour, you're going to have to advocate more than you would if you gave birth at your own home. When you're thinking about the type of birth you want, it's going to go far better for you if you consider how different birth locations can play into your birth experience. You know, I've had clients who've gone into a hospital wanting a complete unmedicated birth, and that just didn't happen because of just hospital policies, things that come into play. And la doula can only do so much. They don't work for the hospital and they can't make medical decisions on your behalf. But just know that as you're making your birth plan, and this is part of what a doula does, is if you want certain things, you might not get them in the hospital. My local hospital doesn't do VBACs. So if a client tells me they want to do a VBAC at Hillsdale Hospital, I'm just going to tell them that's not going to happen. They don't allow that to happen. And so it kind of just prepares the client for what to expect in the environment that they've chosen to give birth in. And also, if they choose to change that environment later, the doula can help set them up for a different hospital, a different birth center, or even a home birth.
Well put, definitely. How can a doula support a mum who has a high risk pregnancy?
Well, I think it depends on what it's high risk for. So I had a client with gestational diabetes, and I was able to
Yeah.
provide her a lot of resources, and it was completely managed. And
Mm.
so none of the birth outcomes that are likely for people with gestational diabetes actually played out because I helped in educating her about her options. So she didn't just have to take X, Y, or Z medication. She was able to manage it holistically and everything went very smoothly. I've supported a VBAC client and that looks very different too, because we're just aware that labor can look differently for these individuals and what's common for these individuals. And if that happens, how can we prepare the client for the outcome? Because I know
Yeah.
with people with gestational diabetes, the doctors like to induce them. Me knowing that helps create a conversation with my client, educating them on why they like to induce, the benefits and risks, how that will play out in the birth space. And then it lets them make an informed decision about this situation. I think also it helps them with recovery afterwards. If you're high risk and something goes wrong, maybe just birth processing and talking about it, or getting them a nutritionist or different resources that can help them along the way.
And high risk isn't always actually high risk. They normally just classify you high risk as something that, it's not a completely 100% textbook pregnancy. Twins are high risk, for instance. And to be high risk, you don't actually have to have something wrong. You just have to have a non-normal pregnancy, something a little bit abnormal.
I know locally in the hospitals that I've worked at, they will consider you high risk if your social situation isn't ideal. So if you are a single parent, if you live below a certain income level, you're considered high risk based off of your social environment and the perceived idea of how much support you'll get, not because you have anything health related at all.
So high risk just could mean anything, really. But yeah, we do support all clients in all shapes and forms and sizes and colors and situations. So so how do you choose the right doula for your needs and preferences? First, I would probably have like a little brainstorming session about what you actually want, what kind of birth ideally you would want, what your core values are. If you are at a church, for instance, if you are religious, maybe you want to have a doula of the same religion. If you have grown up in a particular place, something that might be in common to you, that's always good. Anything that may make you feel a little bit more comfortable with that person is definitely a bonus. And then also the different types of qualifications that they have, right?
Yeah, I agree with all of those. I think it's really important to understand your values and what you want your doula's values to be. If you're wanting, like you mentioned, religious, that's a big one in my area. It's just there's some people who want to support certain people groups. And so they work exclusively with those. And if you're wanting someone to pray with you, then you're probably going to want someone of your same religion to do that. Now, maybe it doesn't matter, but you just want the option. That's something that you talk to the doula you're interviewing, is at the interview, you talk about your values and what that means for your birth space. Some other factors that I've run into are if they're giving birth, maybe they live in the area, but they're giving birth an hour and a half away. Would it be better for me to be their doula if I have to go that far, especially in the winter, at least in Michigan winters? It might be better for them to have a doula closer to the hospital they're giving birth at than for them to have me when it will take me so long to commute there. Another factor to consider is, does your doula have children and what their policy is for their birth time arrival? So I don't have any kids. So as soon as I get that call, I'm basically out and I'll be there for 30 hours straight. That's what I do. But there are doulas with families. They sometimes work with a partner. So they might call their backup doula during that time, or they might have something in their contract saying that they need 4 hours heads up before they'll be able to arrive to find childcare and to get to the location. So those are all things to ask that might not be so much your values, but practically who is the best fit for you in the area and what you expect out of a doula.
Those are all really great points. At the end of the day, if you meet with a doula and you don't feel comfortable with them 100%, it's probably not the right doula for you. If you meet with a doula and you feel so comfortable with them, you feel like you could talk for hours, you feel like you clicked really well, you like all the same things, you feel like they could support you and be there at a time when you're most vulnerable, go ahead.
Right. No matter who your doula is, you need someone that you trust and that you believe wholeheartedly in, that they're going to show up, that they're going to be there, and that they're going to support you in the ways that you would like to be supported. And if you have hesitancies about that, or I'd suggest trying to find another doula in the area and doing a couple interviews, because it's really important that you feel safe in your birth space and that you trust your doula, because they're going to be trying to give you guidance through this really big transition. And if you don't trust what they have to say, or you're skeptical about some of their practices, then that's going to create more of a stress or a conflict than it will be of any benefit to you.
Exactly. What is the process of interviewing and hiring a doula?
Well, in my area, it's as simple as you give me a call or a text. We set up a time and I meet you at a local coffee shop to talk about your expectations and my expectations. Because during the interview process, I also interview my clients to see if they're a good fit for me. Because there's some people that would be better supported with another doula. Maybe it's values or, like I said, the commuting. And so you just talk. It's really casual. All of the ones I've been to it's kind of like you're meeting up with a friend and having coffee and just talking about your plan. So mine are pretty casual. I don't know what it's like for you.
Yeah, me too. I go and have a smoothie with them, or if I'm supporting them virtually, I'll normally hop on a call. I'll like have a quick 15-minute conversation with them to see if we click, to see what they actually want. And then if I'm supporting them in person, I meet up with them for a coffee. We just chat. There's no pressure. At the end of the meeting, if either of you, because it's two ways, if the doula feels like you could be matched better, they might actually recommend someone else, or they might just say, look, I don't know anyone else. I'm quite new to the area, or whatever the situation is. And they might just be like, good luck. Maybe this is where you can find a doula. And there's no pressure at the end of the meeting to go with them, which is the best thing.
And I would say most doulas I know, at the end of the interview, they give it some time to sit before making a decision. So like I'll go home and I'll kind of think about things we talked about, and then I'll do a follow-up text. And then I give my clients, when I interview them, 5 days to kind of interview other people that I suggest or that they find. And then I would like a response within a week, so that way I can either set aside their due date or not. But it's different for each doula.
To be honest, you're going to be working with them. They're probably going to be wearing their sweats, like at the end of the day, you're just going to be chilling in a hospital room or wherever at home for hours on end.
Right. You really want someone you're comfortable with, because they're just going to come into your home at 3 a.m. and be with you for 30 hours straight, potentially. And the doula wants someone they're comfortable with, because if you're laboring at home, they might help themselves to your fridge or your coffee machine or whatever. It's a time where everyone in the space is really vulnerable and just has to get really comfortable really fast. And so it requires a certain level of trust and respect between both parties.
What if the partner is not too keen on the idea of having a doula? Have you had that situation yet?
Yes, I have.
Oh, okay.
You know what? I don't know that I'm the best person to answer this, because I have pretty strong opinions about it. I think ultimately that the couple has to decide what is best for them. In my opinion, you can't go wrong with a doula, but you do want it to be someone you both trust and respect. And if your partner doesn't trust or respect your doula, or your doula doesn't trust and respect your partner, it's not going to create a safe birth space. So if it's better to just not have one for the sake of unity between maybe the spouses or the partners, whatever, then that might be in the best interest. However, I think the hesitancy of a doula is based on a misconception that they take the space of the partner. And sometimes that can feel threatening if the partner really wants to be involved, if they want to ensure that they are always holding the mom's hand and they're worried that the doula is going to take up that space. That's something to bring up in the interview, because personally, I love working with couples because I like to see them come closer together. But yeah, I don't know. I have strong opinions about this topic. I do think that most people, or most partners that don't want a doula for their partner, are coming from a space of either not knowing enough of what a doula does, or maybe a place of insecurity about their role in the birth.
Definitely, 100%. I think it probably comes from the idea of really just not knowing what a doula is and what value that they will bring, and being scared that they're going to be pushed out and not having this moment with their wife or their partner or whatever, if you are in that situation, you just educate, you just let them know, I'm here for you too. I'm not only here for the mum. Obviously, I'm mainly here for the mum, but we will be working together as a team to bring this baby in, to have a beautiful birth. And having a doula can actually increase the connection and make it stronger between couples. It's been proven that, you do have a stronger connection if you have a doula there, because the dad doesn't have to worry about, shit, my wife's screaming really loud. She must be in really a lot of pain. But the doula can just be reassuring, and he doesn't have to worry about anything. He can just be in the moment. So I think having a doula is really great, but what can you do? It's up to the couple at the end of the day.
I think before you interview a doula, you should talk to your partner about what they want and
Yeah.
talk to them about what a doula does, and then have them come with you to the interview. So that way they can also feel comfortable, because it's going to be really difficult for you guys all to work as a team if not everyone is on the same page.
Yeah.
And I think what you brought up a great point. A doula is not just for the mom, they're primarily for them, but having a doula there allowed space for the dad to take breaks. He can take a nap because the doula is there supporting the mom, go get food if she's feeling nauseous, and eat in the hallway. And he has those breaks and she's not left alone. So I think those are all really great points. And I always teach the expecting fathers how to do some of the comfort measures like hip squeezes and counter pressure, so that way they can be as hands-on as they'd like to be.
It does take a lot of pressure off the dad having a doula there.
In what ways can a doula assist during labor and delivery?
So you already kind of touched on it a little bit. There are so many things that a doula can do. They can offer words of comfort and encouragement. They can be holding you up while you're swaying. They can be educating you and helping advocate for you in that moment when the doctor comes in and says, I think we should do a C-section, with no actual apparent reason for it. Because you will know if it's an emergency. They will not be talking slowly. They will be rushing fast. So a doula, they can tell the dad or the partner or the mum of the mum, what's happening right now in this moment here and how the mum might be feeling so that they can understand. They can, help take the pressure off the dad, let him go and have something to eat, as you mentioned before. They could literally be sitting in the corner knitting a scarf and holding the space, making sure that if the doctors are trying to come in, just say, okay, she's having a contraction now. Is it okay if you just come back in like 2 minutes?
Yeah, they do so many things. They also help with birth positioning. So I know if my clients are in certain stages of labor, there are different positions and exercises they can do to help labor continue along. So in my most recent birth, they had mentioned that if nothing changes by 2 hours, they wanted to do a C-section. And so that's kind of when I kicked it into gear. And I was like, let's get into these positions so we can get baby's head engaged, because once baby's head is engaged, everything's going to go a lot faster. And she was able to avoid a C-section just by doing these exercises and getting some electrolytes in her system. And that's what's most rewarding for me, is seeing how much of a difference a doula can make just by the positions and the knowledge that she brings to the space. At the most recent home birth I was in, they were talking about transferring her to a hospital because she'd been pushing for 3.5 hours. And so I asked the midwife, because I was a midwife assistant in this position, so it was kind of out of scope in that regards. I asked her if she'd be okay with me doing some of my doula things. And we had a baby safely delivered within the next hour and a half. And it was a long time for the mom, but they were able to avoid a transfer and a possible emergency C-section just because I was able to get her in the positions that she needed to be in and to provide that verbal encouragement that was needed for her to feel empowered and able to give birth to the baby.
There are so many studies out there proving that doulas do decrease the risk of cesarean by a huge amount.
Yeah, 40%.
Exactly. I'm pretty sure it's more than 40%. It's like 48.3% or something like that. And that number is huge. If you are coming into your birth and you say, I don't want to have a C-section, the doula will make it so that you don't have a C-section, everything in their power. Obviously, there are some times where it's not in their power. They really, you do need a C-section, but they do reduce the C-section immensely. They reduce postpartum depression. They improve couple bonding. They do so many things. There are so many studies that just highlight the benefits of having a doula.
And even if you do need a C-section, there are a lot of ways that a doula can support C-section births, planned or unplanned. I know for me, whenever I do a birth plan, we create if you have to have a C-section, what type of C-section do you want? And I also have begun advocating at local hospitals to allow doulas in the OR during the C-section. So there's a lot of options for that as well. I don't know what your experience is with moms who need a C-section. In your little realm over there, how does it work for you guys for doula support?
Well, most of the time in Indonesia, it's very different. Very, very different. The rate of C-section is very, very high. The level of medical knowledge here is very low. So most of the mums do go into hospital and the doctors are really highly respected because the medical literacy is so low. So here you are pretty much guaranteed to have a C-section, even if you want to have a natural birth. Unless everything's going really smoothly and, there's absolutely no, even a whisper of a hiccup, you will have a C-section. So how a doula will help or support in a C-section, it's a little bit different because there's normally only one person allowed into the theatre with the mum. So if there is only one person allowed, you have to have the discussion with the mum. Okay, do you want dad to come in or the other support person to come in? Or do you want the doula to be there for you? And it's whatever the mum wants. If the mum wants dad in there, if the mum wants grandma in there, that's what needs to happen. The doula will still, most of the time, stick by just in case. They normally have to wait outside the theatre, but they will offer support after the baby has arrived. They can sometimes come into recovery with the mum and help the mum wake up and support the mum as she wakes up if she's put under general. Most of the time she's not, but there is still a lot of fogginess sometimes, and it can be very confusing. Just like educating the mum and the dad how this will happen. So normally the doctor will come in, okay, we need to do a C-section. Here, sign this form. They'll go through. If the dad's going through, you can quickly say, okay, these are some ways quickly that you can support mum. And if this is in a birth plan, and they want to do maternal assisted C-section, which normally doesn't happen in an emergency. That's basically where the mum will help deliver the baby by a C-section. It's actually pretty cool. Or they'll put like a clear drape up and you can actually see the baby being delivered, which is also really cool. I think it's cool. Some people are like, oh my God, that's so creepy. And yeah, basically just like quickly telling them, this is what you want, skin to skin after the baby comes out. This is how you make it happen. This is how you need to be communicating with the team to make sure that you can get this what you want. How would you support a mum with C-section?
Well, my first birth that I've ever done was a planned C-section. So, she was in labor, but it hadn't progressed the way she wanted to. And so she opted for it. And so it meant like before I braided her hair while she was contracting so she could have it out of her space, we had already made a birth plan based off of what would happen or what she'd want if she had to have a C-section delivery. I was holding her hand while they did the IVs and was trying to just, bringing in that calm, peaceful energy, putting on the music while they were getting prepped. And then when she went back, it meant that I cleaned up their room. So there was, gowns and clothing. I folded their clothes. I packed it. I laid out the baby's outfits, put on the sound machine and made it a nice, peaceful environment for them to come back to. She was groggy. And then while the dad was gone, the nurse came in and was going to give a vitamin K shot to the baby, but she specifically requested not to. So I was right there and I was like, can we wait until the mom comes back? It was on her birth plan that she didn't want vitamin K. I would like to check in with her to see if that's changed. And so the nurse came back and asked her directly after she had come out of her grogginess. And I was able to advocate for her birth plan when she wasn't able to for baby. And then talking, about breastfeeding, with a C-section, you have to kind of position yourself a little differently. I also made a fast food run because no one had eaten, and I went and got a charger for dad. So it was just creating a space that was peaceful, making sure that the part of our birth plan that was specifically for baby was honored and followed. And yeah, just holding that peaceful space and making sure that they could focus on each other and on their new baby and not have to worry about running to Walmart for a charger cord and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. I know we've kind of touched a little bit, but like, how do you think doula support for a home birth versus a hospital birth would differ?
It would differ because there's limited access to certain things in each environment. So in a home birth, you don't have access to pain medication. So it's going to be a lot more hands-on with pain relief. However, there's also going to be a part of it which is the doula might come early and help you prepare the home, set up the pool. If you're having a water birth, maybe they help string up lights or they call the people that need to be there. The doula also goes before the midwife. So maybe they're keeping an eye on contractions while the couple is, doing their thing. And then once the contractions get to a certain point, maybe they text the midwife directly and give them updates on how things are progressing. They just might clean or set up the space. And in a doula's downtime, if they're in your home, they can have access to all of your lotions, or like you have water, or you can make, I don't know, like electrolyte drinks. It's so much easier because there's not the hospital restrictions. However, if you're giving birth at a hospital, there's a lot more advocating for your birth plan because the hospital has a certain way they always do things unless it's wanted otherwise. And if someone wants otherwise, you have to have a person, or you have to be willing to advocate yourself for what you want. Because I guess maybe from a hospital perspective, a doula kind of stands in that process and pauses the system a lot. So I think there's more advocating in a hospital birth than there is in a home birth. There's a greater likelihood of medical interventions in a hospital, which makes it also important that the doula has familiarity with how to adapt to those. So, for example, an epidural, depending on the range of motion and whether it's a light or a heavy epidural, the mom's not going to be able to move herself. So the doula is going to be helping her physically get into different positions every 30 minutes so that way labor doesn't stall. So it can look very different, but for the most part, they can adapt to any environment and be really useful and helpful in providing information, guidance, and techniques for your specific birth plan.
There is this question that I actually got asked the other day. It was more a mum looking for support. And the question is, can a doula support in free birth? This is a difficult one because we aren't medical. I mean, I am, but if you're just a doula, if you're a doula and you're just in the capacity of a doula acting then, you can't act if something goes wrong. You have to know your shit if you are going to help with a free birth. And this person wanted to have a free birth in Bali. And one, it was illegal to have a home birth in the first place in Bali, let alone a water birth or, God forbid, a free birth. You can't expect a doula to just be like, yep, I'm going to support you with a free birth. Some doulas will, some doulas won't. They don't want to accept the liability for if something goes wrong because they aren't medical and they can't act in a medical sense if something does go wrong. So you as the mum have to know if something does go wrong, what your options are. If you do want to have a free birth, probably a good idea to have a hospital close by or somebody on call just in case you need some medical personnel there fast because things can go fast quick.
I would say the short answer is yes, but yes, doulas can help in assisting during a free birth, but it depends on what the expectation is when you talk about assisting. Are you just wanting someone there to hold your hand and to help you with physical comfort measures, or are you expecting them to catch the baby? And if you are planning a free birth, that is something to talk about during your interview because not all doulas, like you mentioned, want to accept that level of liability, especially because it can damage the relationships with other birth professionals in the area. It's a very controversial topic. And so it might not be something that certain doulas are comfortable with. And it might also depend on the situation. Like some doulas might be comfortable with it as long as you're going to all of your prenatals and you're like incredibly low risk and you do have a backup plan and they see all of the work that you're doing to reduce the liability, they might be willing to step into that space. I've not had this situation come up, so I've actually had to think about it that much. But I wouldn't be comfortable going into a free birth with someone who is uneducated because of all the risk factors. But that being said, like I know, like if I was to choose to have a free birth, which is not likely, but my husband was a paramedic for several years. And I have midwife friends that are within an hour of me, multiple of them. And then I also have a huge community of birth workers around me. I know I'm very educated in this topic and I have a lot of resources available. The hospital's a block away from my house. So the risk for me is relatively low, which might make a doula more comfortable. But I think that in general, it really just depends on the individual doula, the individual who's giving birth. And that kind of goes back to the question of how can a doula support your values or how can you find a doula with your values? These are things you talk about during the interview and that come up. So
exactly.
One thing I wanted to talk about was doula support during a miscarriage or stillbirth.
Yeah.
I think this ranges depending on the type of doula you hire and what their contract is. If a mom in my care was to have a miscarriage, I would give them a refund because I wouldn't want to be a financial burden on an already difficult situation. And I would care for them postpartum. And that would just look differently depending on what stage they miscarried. I think for a stillbirth, a doula can still provide all of the benefits if they're still going to go through delivery and birth. So I guess I personally would give them the option. And if they wanted doula support, I would continue in my care as planned and then continue in the postpartum plan and then probably extend and do extensive research and get them the resources they need so that way they can recover mentally and still feel empowered that even though, you know, baby isn't earthside, that this is still a labor of love for their baby. It's a horrible situation, but I think that a doula can kind of help it become bittersweet and not see this birth as a failure, but recognize the sacredness of the baby that the mom's not going to be able to keep and to hold that space for them and to just be someone that was there through the process and just love on the family.
It is a hard situation. It does happen, unfortunately. And that's part of this whole journey. Losing babies is terrible, but it does happen. And that is a service that most doulas, I would think, would offer. There are doulas that specifically specialize in loss and miscarriage. Yeah, as you said, just support. It's still a birth, even if the baby does not live. It's still a birth. You still will have the hormones released that you would if the baby was alive. So the doula would help with lactation support because you would still lactate. If you do want to donate your milk, they can help organize that for you. If you don't, that's fine. They will help you decrease your milk supply so that you don't get mastitis and don't get an infection. Some doulas do take psychology courses to help mums in this situation. And they also do help with like postpartum depression as well. That's also something that they do help with. But yeah, it is a terrible, terrible part of life, unfortunately. But a doula can be amazing support. There are even some doulas, if you want to give them this power to just, here's my phone, screen my calls, I can't deal with it. And organizing the support system to help them in the rest of their journey. Everybody's journey is different.
I know for me, I also work as a pastor. And so I end up working with a lot of Christian couples. I have a liturgy that I can bring for miscarriage and stillbirth to the space, offer prayer, and I have taken a little bit of counseling through my education, my formal education. So I'm a hospital clergy at the local hospital. So I get called in for trauma situations whenever they arise. And I was there Christmas morning because someone was losing their mom. And so I think when it comes to this topic, it brings back why it's important to pick the doula that's right for you, because situations like these do happen. And is this doula going to be there through this? And what does it mean if it happens? especially if this has happened before and you don't know, there can be a lot of anxiety in that space. And so you really need someone who is going to support you and someone you can talk to and who you feel genuinely cares about you, your baby, and your birth outcome. Part of it is just validating their experience because it's hard and labor is painful. It's difficult to do that knowing that you don't get to keep the baby that you worked so hard for. And I think a doula can remind people in those spaces that just because, their baby's in heaven now, it does not diminish the work they did. It does not invalidate them as a mom. They're still a mother. They still have done all the things, and it wasn't their fault. Some things you can't change. And just, like you said, holding the space.
So, what kind of postpartum support can I expect from a doula?
Well, I think that goes into the type of doula that you hire. I know for me, immediately after birth, I stay at the hospital for a couple hours to help with lactation support, whether that's getting baby to latch or even beforehand, like colostrum harvesting and just making sure they understand that. Education is another one, making sure they understand how many diapers baby should be going through, how to tell if baby's latch is good, different positions they can try. And then I have a minimum of 2 postpartum visits. The first one, we go over birth processing. It's just basically a fancy term for discussing how you believe your birth went, things you liked and didn't like. I do that because it helps with women feeling heard, and that can decrease the likelihood of postpartum depression developing any further. At the first visit, I bring a coffee because it's normally a couple weeks after the birth, and babies' sleeping routines and breastfeeding routines are starting to get a little more wearisome. So I always bring a coffee to the first visit, and we just talk for the most part, and I get them more resources. I also assess for postpartum depression with the Edinburgh test. I assess for pelvic floor issues and make a referral if needed. And then I allow for my clients to just text me any questions for the first 6 weeks that they have and get them connected to all the resources they need. And then I also do a lot with perineum care. So my last client, I bought a perineum package, like care kit, like the cooling packs and the healing foam, tucks, all of that stuff, and just teaching them how to use it and how to care for themselves postpartum so that they can be well rested and educated and just focus on baby and minimize other things in their life.
Yeah, gosh, it will look different for everyone, I think. And every doula has a different postpartum package. Some doulas will just do 1 visit or 2 visits, and like some doulas just won't. If you just get a birth doula, they might not offer postpartum care. So make sure you check that when you do interview. If you do wish to have postpartum care, which not all women do, you need to make sure beforehand. Or you might just hire a postpartum doula. If you feel completely confident with the birth, you've got all that stuff under control, and you just want some help postpartum, make sure you look for a postpartum doula. And yeah, as I said, each doula has a different package. So as you mentioned, you do 2 visits.
Minimum of 3 visits prenatal and then minimum of 2 postpartum.
And then you have text message support.
It's not 24/7. Like, I'm not going to wake up for your text, but it is 24/7 phone call starting 2 weeks before your estimated due date. Yeah, it just depends on each client. Because while I did all of that for my last client, with my previous client, the thing that I did was I came in for a couple hours. I brought food and watched her little other 3 kids while she was able to take like an hour of self-care because that's what she needed. And I like to do a couple things for certain. And as long as I hit those, the rest of the time, I just want to be whatever is most beneficial for you.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it looks different for everyone. Some people might have their mums, their grandmoms come and stay with them to help them, and that's great support. Some women are doing it alone. They don't have anyone. And some women, it's just the partner and them. And some women have the neighbors help them out, and that's really great, or their friends. Each support network looks different. But how I support mums is kind of similar to yours. It's a few in-person visits and then it's text message support. And they have access to my platform of blog articles. I've written quite a few blog articles on my website, so they have access to that. I mean, everyone has access to that, so that's not any additional. And as you said, you took care of the kids. It can be as simple as holding the baby while the mum has a shower, having some me time for the mum and dad, and carrying the baby and going out for a walk. Sometimes mum just wants to get outside and not just stuck on the sofa. So yeah, it looks different for everyone. But breastfeeding support is one of the main things that I help with because latching, getting the latch right is everything. And most new mums don't have any support with that. And to be honest, even with my mum, I feel like I wouldn't want her telling me how to latch, even though she probably has all the, knowledge in the world. I don't know. I don't feel comfortable showing her my boobs and, doing that stuff. And it's a bit of like, you feel like you are made to do this. But remember, you're doing it for the first time. It's okay. You might get it wrong. And that's why a doula is there to help you solve these issues so that it's not painful. Breastfeeding is not supposed to be painful.
Right.
Yeah.
No, it's not. And that's what I tell all the moms. Like, it might feel a little bit weird at first, maybe a little bit uncomfortable, but you shouldn't be feeling these sensations. Yeah, your nipples won't get chapped if it's a good latch, for sure.
All right. I think we have exhausted the time that we have, but thank you for coming on to talk to me.
Thank you. I really enjoyed doing this with you. It's good to see you again, too.
These are all really great questions, and we covered quite a lot of them. And I hope that it's cleared some things up for the listeners out there. Doulas are worth the money, and it's an extra cost on top of the stuff that you are paying for already to have a baby, but it is well worth it. And if you don't have the money to pay, some doulas, they do it for free.
They might do it for free. I've taken on one free birth, not like free birth, but like a birth for free. They might offer a sliding scale. Your insurance might cover it. And then sometimes you can get make a GoFundMe for the doula to still get paid for the birth. So I've seen it done a lot of different ways.
That's one thing that I wanted to mention. If you know someone who's having a baby shower, ask them if they want a doula and ask around rather than people buying you stuff. Maybe they can pay for the doula because that's always an option. That was something else that I wanted to touch on. In America, I think doulas have just started to be covered by insurance, right?
Yes, they have.
But in Australia and other parts of the world, they are not covered.
Yeah, it's still It's still work in progress over here too. It's covered under Medicaid, so not private insurances won't pay for it yet. But you can also pay with an HSA provided by your employer. So if you do have a health savings account, you can use that money to go directly to doula care.
There you go.
A lot of options out there.
Yeah. Well, it was so great to talk to you again. And I'm really hoping that everyone finds this episode, helpful because doulas are amazing. And I'm not just saying that because I am a doula. You can find Elizabeth at EB Birth Services on Instagram, EB Birth Services, or Elizabeth Beeker's Birth Services on Facebook. She's always posting some great stuff on there. So I love following her. And you can even hire her if you are in her area. If you're enjoying the podcast, make sure to give us a follow and rate the show. And if you know someone who you think needs to hear this episode, give it a share so we can spread the word and educate more mamas and women worldwide. And we'll see you next Monday for another juicy episode. For more information on pregnancy, birth, and parenthood, head over to my website or Instagram at blissfulbirth.co. And just a little reminder, the information contained in this podcast is here to educate and empower and does not replace the advice of your own healthcare provider.